Nanaas and Ginanas Noel, Marcy Kekiel, Niwako Makanak. So welcome. My name is Zoe Todd. I am a Métis person from Amiskwaciwâskahikan or Edmonton in Treaty 6 territory. And I'm really lucky that I get to work on unceded and unsurrendered Algonquin territories from which Carleton is broadcasting tonight's wonderful event. And just before we start, I'm just going to sort of acknowledge just gratitude for everything that the Algonquin Nation, sort of like supports within its own unceded and unsurrendered homelands, and just the incredible opportunity that we have to come into better relations with the Algonquin Nation. I'm really proud to be, connected to our department here at Carleton and the work that we are doing within the department, to be, really conscious of our responsibilities and obligations to the Algonquin Nation. And it's so amazing tonight to have Kirsten Dumont, who is a proud member of the Algonquin Nation and an incredible youth leader from Kitigan-Zibi, who's going to be sharing her amazing insights tonight, and also Mark Miracle, who is a really powerful local community leader and advocate, and both are going to be sharing their amazing knowledge. So just again, to sort of recognize how deeply grateful I am as a Métis person to have lived within the homelands of the Algonquin Nation for the past several years, and to get to work with amazing Algonquin people, both at Carleton and beyond. It has enriched me as an Indigenous thinker, and it has taught me a lot about diplomacy and the legal and ethical obligations that we all carry towards nations whose lands have been taken illegally and unethically by the Canadian state, and the ongoing work of reconciling that and repairing those violences remains one of the most pressing issues that Canada faces today. So I hope that we can sort of open tonight's event in a really good way, and invite sort of thoughtful engagement with our two brilliant speakers. And I'm just so grateful to Blair for organizing this and for approaching us. I'm grateful to Paula for organizing some of the logistics behind the scenes, and to Stephanie for the beautiful poster she made. Again, our department's such a great collegial and supportive space. So yeah, I'm glad we can invite you into our space virtually. I wish we could invite you physically and give you snacks. I don't want to take up too much time because I want to make sure that we get straight to the good stuff. So I'm going to introduce both of our speakers. They're going to give presentations on their work, and then we'll open it up to questions afterwards. So Blair did ask me just to remind you that we are recording this evening. If you are uncomfortable with that, like, please, if you need to turn off your video, or if you need to step out, we totally understand. Afterwards, with the questions, I would ask, just as moderator, to keep things a bit smooth. If you have questions as the speakers are presenting their work tonight, if you could submit them in the chat, either to me privately or to the group chat, either is fine. I'll collect them and then share them at the end. And if after sort of sharing some of the questions we've already collected, there are more questions after that, then we can open up perhaps to some live questions if the speakers are comfortable, but we can also do it textually as well. So I guess without further ado, I'm going to introduce both of our speakers, and I didn't ask which one of you wanted to go first. So I'll introduce you, and then we can decide. So Mark Miracle is a Mohawk from the Tyendinaga Mohawk Territory, and has been involved with First Nations and Indigenous issues over the course of his 38-year professional career. His initial background was in architectural design and the preparation of construction documents and capital project management. His background also includes community development, economic development, program and project design and management, program and project evaluation, negotiations of federal transfers of program management, communications, facilitation, conflict resolution, and strategic planning. Kirsten Dumont is a passionate, caring young woman and a proud band member of the Algonquins of Kitigan-Zibi. She has been awarded 3 times for her work within and outside of the Indigenous communities. Kirsten has taken part in sacred walks to protect the water, spoken on Parliament Hill about climate justice and human rights, and spoken at the House of Commons about the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls genocide. She is an advocate, an educator, and a mentor to her family and community alike. So welcome. So grateful for you both to be here. This is really, really exciting. So I don't know which one of you wants to go first. I'll open it up to you.
Kirsten, I would offer you the opportunity to speak first.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that. That being said, I will take the floor. In regards to the work that I do, I think that Zoe covered it a lot, but I'm going to dive into the education piece in my background. As somebody who has always struggled academically and with different learning disabilities, I had very low faith within the education system. I was in and out of the education system for a very large point in my life. And thankfully, with the help and support of my family, I was able to dive back into it with success, motivation, and appreciation for an education system that I felt lacked representation, decolonization, and reconciliation. But through this appreciation came my ability to be able to connect with educators and help them progress within their classrooms and their lives. This progression led to the infusion of Indigenous pedagogy with colonial. Intersectionality is something that's incredibly important to me, bridging that gap and ensuring that we can come together as one community, one country, instead of the divide that the government and Canada has created between us all. Through this work, I've been able to work alongside both the Ottawa Carleton School Board and the Ottawa Catholic School Board. Although there's still an immense amount that needs to be done and things that need to be changed and fixed within these kinds of systems and institutions, bringing in Indigenous voices, both elders and youth, creates an awareness not only for the educators, but for the institutions, the students, and the future generations that are going to take these positions and go into these classes. It's vital that we put Indigenous voices, opinions, and knowledge at the forefront of everything that we do. It's been said time and time again that Indigenous people teach Indigenous people, and within Indigenous culture, we never had a timeline for how long it would take us to accumulate said education, because we believed that we would be educating ourselves and learning from others until the day that we move on to the spirit world. The process and the idea of a timeline connected to a piece of paper that says you are enough or you have obtained the correct amount of knowledge or education is just incorrect. As somebody who will be graduating from high school this very year, I think that I am a perfect example that the ideal academic scenario that people are supposed to go through doesn't fit every single person that goes into that mold. They continue to look at us like we are copies made from each other, like we fit one thing, we are supposed to be one way, act, respond in a certain belief that they feel we are structured their elders, their knowledge keepers, rather than a colonial institution that's teaching you from
Kristen, I'm so sorry. I think your sound is cut out.
Of my people. It was built for the everyday Canadian citizen. But through infusion and partnerships and relationships that can be built through community rather than through individuals, this is how we create progression in regards to creating a more wholesome space for not only Indigenous individuals, but for individuals who fit outside of the categorized box. There's so many things that make people stop from going to school, so many delays, and educators don't take these things into account. They don't consider abuse within the home. They don't consider the housing crisis. A lot of youth live on their own. I was one of them that had to move out at the age of 17. And what I was paying then versus what I'm paying now for where I live has changed incredibly. Where are 17-year-olds supposed to go now? If I was 17 today and I had to move out on my own, I would be homeless. I would not be able to afford the financial stability and the financial need that these institutions, these organizations, these places expect of you. And through these barriers for not only Indigenous people, but for all people, this creates barriers for education. This creates a delay, and educators don't take this into a fact. They expect you to be there, be on time, and fit into that box. And unfortunately, that's just not realistic. It's not realistic in today's world. And it wasn't realistic 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. Because through time, we deal with so many different things, so many different struggles, and so many different pains. There's things that my grandparents have gone through that I will never understand. And there's things that I have gone through that my grandparents will never stand. And I think that that shows not necessarily how we evolve, but how we deal with things differently, but how we succeed and become successful through the adversity that we all have to carry on our shoulders every single day, not only for what we deal with, but for what our family has dealt with, our siblings are dealing with. These are things that affect us in a way that nobody can understand. A lot of people talk about generational trauma, and I want to start talking about generational happiness, generational success, where we can start passing down these positive vibes and feelings and emotions to our family members, when we can start passing down success and gratitude and appreciation and motivation to show them that, yes, you will make it there. You can be whatever you want. My family told me that I could be prime minister one day. Negative things within our lives. It's incredible. When I had gone back to school, I was so worried. I was terrified that I would be judged, that I would be looked down upon. And here I am graduating with 90s, 80s, nothing but A's and A pluses. I'm 21, but come September, I'm going into university or college. I'm going right back into the institution that I was terrified of when I was 11, 12, 13 years old. The same institutions that I'm now working alongside, such as Carleton. Being able to be here today and thinking to myself that I'm going to be applying to the IESP program for September is incredible. Knowing that I've been able to speak on a platform as big as this, despite the things that I've dealt with, despite the negative, dark clouds that have come over in my life, they always move away. And I know that sometimes that can sound like such a fairy tale. How do you get out of that spot? You know, some people get so stuck in their own heads, and I do too. I get stuck in my own head a lot, and I start to dwell on myself and get negative about even my successes because I feel that I can do more. And when I can't reach that mountaintop, I get sad and I get frustrated and I wonder if I'm doing enough. But through these dark, negative, emotion filled clouds, we need to look to the other side and we need to look to the future generations. I look to my sister who's 10 years younger than me and my brother who's 20 years younger than me. I fight every single day for them, for their happiness, so that I can pass down motivation and inspiration to them so that they don't have to carry the negativity that I once held. And I look at life in such a positive light now because throughout these years where I was battling with school, battling with mental health, battling with who I was in such a negative place that I now see it and I don't want to be that. I don't want to waste any more of my time on dwelling on the negatives when I can be looking at the positives and looking about how I can progress as a leader and how I can help my community progress into happiness and equality within a city that is so urbanized and colonial. But with that being said, I am so thankful to be here today, and Chimi Gwech everyone for listening to me and hearing my story.
Hi. Thank you so much, Kirsten. It's so great. Just seeing young people succeed is always very like uplifting and just like the story that you shared of your educational journey is a good reminder to many of us who are educators that students are coming into the classroom with so many dynamic stories. And so just thank you for sharing it with us and holding space for us to hear your story. And yeah, and it's really congratulations too. Like it's so exciting that you're going to be graduating and coming to university. And I am much older than you, but I still remember how, you know, exciting that was when I was much younger. And so just thank you so much. It's so wonderful to hear your journey. So that's such a beautiful grounding for us to turn to Mark now to share his work in the community, and both of you just uphold such important space in Ottawa for many different community members. So thank you, Mark.
Good evening, and thank you very much for the opportunity to share some of the work that the Ottawa Aboriginal Coalition has been involved in. I firstly want to acknowledge the fact that we are located on Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory, and for the Algonquins in hosting us on their territory. I'm currently the executive director with Gignal Housing here in Ottawa for the past 17 years. Gignal Housing is the largest Indigenous housing provider in Ottawa. We've been around since 1986. And we have a 7-member Indigenous board and 9 staff. We have 201 units and that are located in 74 buildings across the city, with a concentrate. About 60% of our portfolio is in Vanier. And we're located there because that's where the greatest need is in the community in terms of affordability and location. And we were at the time when we were able to purchase units really between 1986 and 1993. We were trying to maximize the number of units to make that available to respond to community demand. My presentation, what I'd like to start out is just simply to situate Indigenous people in Canada and drill down to the Ottawa area, and then talk a little bit about the origins of the Ottawa Aboriginal Coalition and our journey to where we find ourselves today. Also situating how the coalition does our work and our approach which is essentially through building relationship streams. Also to characterize the coalition and the work and how we do it. And I'll finish off with just identifying current coalition priorities. So maybe just to kick off the situating Indigenous people, we represent about 5% of the Canadian population. And the biggest takeaway, I think, is that 85% of Indigenous people are located in urban areas throughout Canada. They're not on a reserve, they're not in the north, they're not on Métis settlements, they're in urban areas. And a lot of people don't make that link. And certainly the media doesn't do a whole lot to frame that, I think, in the proper context. And Indigenous people find themselves in urban areas for a host of reasons. A lot revolve around pursuing post-secondary education, certainly their ability to access better or appropriate healthcare, pursuing employment, pursuing training, securing adequate housing. In many instances, people are fleeing violence or, poor or little positive choice in their home communities. The other takeaway I think that's interesting about the urban Indigenous population is that there is a growing number of generational urban Indigenous people that don't necessarily have a connection with a home community and can go back. And we're finding that even that generational population, it could be 2, sometimes 3 generations deep, that parents and their children and now their children are having children. And if you ask them where home is, they don't necessarily say Tyendinaga or Kittiganzivi. They would say Ottawa, because that's where they grew up. The other interesting takeaway in terms of demographics is that 50% of our population is under the age of 25. And almost 40% of that population is under the age of 15. So just from a policy or a program and service perspective, it's a real challenge to all levels of government, certainly mainstream institutions and organizations that serve Indigenous people. That's a real challenge going forward. The other interesting takeaway is that we're seeing people live longer. And that's because they're making better health choices, the better healthcare system. But the irony for a lot of our older people is they're running out of money faster. They were usually the last ones hired, the first ones fired. A lot of them were in employment that didn't have pensions. And they didn't, or they haven't necessarily built equity like many mainstream Canadians through purchasing a home and building equity that way. So that's an interesting factor. In Ottawa alone, we have in excess of 40,000 Indigenous people. So it's a significant population. And I'll just maybe quickly move now into the origins of the Ottawa Aboriginal Coalition. We formed in around 2000, 2001, and it was at the time probably about 6 or 7 service providers that came together around the issue of homelessness. And the federal government were rolling out, I believe it was the Skippy program, but it was essentially the federal homelessness partnership strategy. And they wanted to roll out homelessness funding through the municipalities. And we knew at that time, from an Indigenous community perspective, that 1/3 of the homeless population in Ottawa were Indigenous people. And we went to the city at that time and asked if they would be willing to do an Indigenous or an Aboriginal set aside at the time. And to the city's credit, they earmarked, I believe it was about 19% at that time, and dedicated that toward Indigenous homelessness. So that was the start of a much bigger and growing conversation about advocating with the collective voice and trying to amplify Indigenous issues and concerns that were relevant to, at this stage, within the city of Ottawa. And as I said before, where we started to orient our work was in relationship streams. And we've probably got almost a dozen now, but certainly the first big one was the municipal relationship, where we developed the leadership table and a technical working group that was actually put in place in 2007. And at the federal level, we were able to access funding that was under the urban Aboriginal strategy that is now currently the urban Indigenous strategy, that's working with 32 urban communities across the country. Provincially, they're also engaged to the Indigenous Affairs Ontario office. And another relationship stream that we started early, probably around 2004, 2005, was with the United Way. That certainly raised a lot of money in the Ottawa community. And we know, or knew at the time, that they made a very, very small investment in Indigenous community or Indigenous organizations at the time. And in fact, it was less than 0.5% in terms of the amount of funding that they raised. And we certainly wanted to see a better reflection. Certainly, they've been consistent over the years that they want to help the most vulnerable people in our communities that represent the biggest opportunity for change. And nothing reflects that better than Indigenous children and youth. And we've been, as a priority of the coalition, certainly children and youth are the #1 priority. If we're driven by demographics, and we are, 50% of who we are is under the age of 25. So 50% of our work should be earmarked and geared towards serving children and youth issues. Over time, another relationship stream that we developed was one with the school boards. And with the school boards, it was trying to show value in our community for the children, and certainly for the organizations that exist to serve community. And we started out by just simply taking any interested teachers, administrators, school staff on a community tour. And we finished off with a luncheon that we held at the Wabano Center for Aboriginal Health, and had keynote speakers and presentations to the school boards that again demonstrated that there was value that we were serving in the community, and there was an asset base that was, for a lot of school officials, they had no recognition or understanding that we owned buildings, we were developing property, that we offered such a wide range of programs and services. And it was really about trying to shift the value and develop a relationship where the school boards were more actively including Indigenous community resources and people, and incorporating that in the curriculum. That's still a work in progress, but I think we've come a long way in certainly the Ottawa Carleton District School Board and the Catholic School Board, in working with the coalition and working with community resources to have a better engagement around Indigenous issues. We've also developed a relationship with the Ottawa Police Services, which is still a work in progress. And it's something that we have to work at, and the police have to work at, and they are certainly committed to finding better and more effective ways to work in the community and with the community. And we have a tendency to kind of go from crisis to crisis. And that's an area that we want to get away from and be more proactive. We've even most recently with a relationship with the hospitals and the police are talking about, rather than a SWAT team to intervene in situations, would be to have a healthcare SWAT team and people with cultural knowledge, community knowledge, and mental health skills that would focus on, understanding and de-escalation, and trying rather than a confrontational approach, one that's far more engaging and cooperative. Employment training is an area that's emerging with a lot more priority. And certainly as we come out of the pandemic, we're hoping to be able to host and develop career fair approaches that are bringing prospective employers to the community with genuine opportunity, and work on a more effective recruitment base. And again, working with the potential that we have in our young people. I think there is an energy and a potential that is so vast and so untapped, and the opportunities are just fabulous. And I look forward to working in this area much more diligently. Housing and homelessness is another area that there is quite a wide range of programs and services related to this. We know that on the homeless side, it's stubbornly overrepresented, and we're always working at trying to address not only the supply issue of housing, but also the affordability aspect. And for urban Indigenous people, housing is such an essential determinant of health. And we have a tendency to undervalue just how important having safe, secure housing plays in one's life, and certainly in families. And again, from a holistic point of view, being able to connect our tenants with programs and services and information and celebration in the community that's so essential to making people feel welcome and included, and being part of a solution in building community. We've also, as a coalition, making a much bigger investment around an Indigenous women's safety table, and the whole notion of violence, and building on some of the recommendations that were emerging from the Missing, Murdered, and Indigenous Women and Girls report, but breathing life in that report with the city in a more meaningful way, as well as the police. As I said, the work of the coalition is really about collective voice and amplifying our issues and concerns. We do that by developing a common agenda with all of the relationships that we do have, and to the best of our ability to align our priorities and actions with our partners, but also so that it becomes doable, that we're not trying to do something that's not unachievable, that we're actually going to realize a return on investment of time and resources, and also always seeking agreement around how do we measure outcomes and results and success, being able to report that back to community as well as to our partners. But we put a lot of emphasis when or prior to the pandemic. We normally hosted 2 community forums that had 250 people in attendance, and we used the community forum to present the work of the coalition, to get feedback and input from community members, to ratify approaches that we were suggesting and opportunities that we wanted to take advantage of. But it was always done with the endorsement or ratification of community. And again, in the relationship streams, perhaps the richest relationship that we have developed has been one with the city of Ottawa at the municipal level. And municipal government is truly where the rubber hits the road. And our initial focus had been on relationship building, identifying service gaps. But with the COVID interruption, it certainly challenged the relationship with the city. And we're currently in a process of resetting our relationship with the city with a focus and a better understanding, I think, by both sides to understand what we're saying. And quite often in relationships, people see each other, they hear each other, but they don't necessarily understand each other. And I think we're at a much better place now in our relationships. The city has a better understanding of our priorities, that their current funding formulas don't necessarily work in the Indigenous community context, and a much more meaningful focus on reconciliation. The city is beginning to get it, I think is the best way to say this. The city has had a tendency to look at the relationship from an equity framework, where the coalition and Indigenous people have been trying to present our reality through a social justice framework. And I think we're only at the front end of exploring what that means and unpacking it in a way that the city has a better understanding of Indigenous people, Indigenous ways of knowing, and how important culture is in terms of providing a foundation to our worldview and how we communicate with the world. The other, just in terms of priorities, as I said, the municipal reset is a big portion of our work. We've got an emerging relationship with the hospitals, and also an agenda that's focusing more on research. The initial research has been around our experiences with COVID, the relationship with the United Way and Ottawa Public Health, and that relationship around better services and access to all kinds of PPE and information related to COVID, but also research that's focused on individuals' experiences with COVID, organizational experiences with COVID, and certainly the role of the coalition in terms of convening and connecting and coordinating organizations with resources and information, documenting that entire process. And we really want to be better prepared from a policy point of view, because it's inevitable there's going to be another pandemic or another community challenge that's going to make it more urgent that urban Indigenous people get equitable and fair access and treatment when challenges are presented to community collectively. The other area that I think is new to a lot of things that we've been involved in is a much broader engagement on development in the community, from LeBreton Flats to a reimagining of a 25-year plan around Confederation Heights, the new civic hospital that's being developed. There is a proposal to redevelop Larga Baffin that services an Inuit population that is quite significant in Ottawa and bringing people from the north, as well as the redevelopment of the Salvation Army to a site on Montreal Road that's going to have a major impact on the Vanier community. Another interesting area that we've been focusing on as well is working with the city to identify land for community use, whether it's gathering or ceremony or celebration, but certainly space to connect community members with culture, with elders and traditional people, with teachings, and ultimately with Mother Earth, which, is so essential to grounding our understanding of who we are as Indigenous people in this world. Once again, I go back to the whole notion of an Indigenous worldview that's understood not only by ourselves, but we're able to communicate where we think we fit in the world to non-Indigenous people as well. I think with that, I'll probably just end off. Certainly the coalition, it's about collective action and collective impact. And I think if we have a role to play in community, it's about providing better and positive choice to community members, to organizations. And if I was to use an analogy, I think it would be one that's related to identifying doors. And our job as a coalition is to make sure those doors are unlocked. And it's up to an individual or an organization to pick what door they want to walk through, and know that it's unlocked, and know that their community and the coalition is behind them. And if they happen to get knocked down, that we're going to be right there to help pick them up and dust them off and go, pick another door, it's going to be unlocked, and try again. And I think that's an attitude that we carry and that we encourage, and hopefully it pays off. So thank you.
Gananas Comitin, thank you so much, Mark. That was an incredible, comprehensive overview of the work that the Ottawa Aboriginal Coalition does, and also just getting to see glimpses into your work is really exciting. And yeah, and this is just really exciting. There's a lot of stuff I didn't know that was happening in Ottawa, and I was thinking like, oh, if I have only gotten involved while I was there. So, but I'm so grateful to you for sharing that. And so before, there's a few questions that have come to me, direct message. But before I dive into the audience's questions, I might just ask you and Kirsten a couple of questions that kind of came to me as I got to listen to both of your great presentations. And so I guess the first one I wanted to ask was, if you were to look at something in the community right now that gives you a lot of hope, what would be sort of one of the first things that comes to mind for you right now? I'll open it up to both of you.
I would say the progression that we're starting to have as a community, both within urban settings and rural, all around Canada. I think we're gaining, as citizens, we're gaining a better understanding of each other, of our differences, and of the true history that Canada has continuously tried to hide from citizens. And I think that now people are really starting to wake up, and that's one of the most motivational and inspirational things within the community that really inspires me.
Thank you.
Probably the biggest revelation in the last, certainly over the course of the pandemic, is that it has actually brought the coalition and the 11 members that we currently have much closer together. And it was because we needed each other. We were meeting by Zoom weekly probably for the first 6 months, 8 months of the pandemic. And I think it allowed, it certainly kept us together. And from a mental health point of view, it's all executive directors. So we were all going through very similar experiences. And it had a profound effect in keeping us together, keeping us coordinated, and keeping us all focused on community and identifying the vulnerable parts of our community, our elders and traditional people, and young mothers and people that coordinating food drops and appointments and just keeping everybody together and connecting. I know that we were contacting a lot of the seniors or the more vulnerable tenants in our own portfolio just to do a check-in, and that had a big difference. And I think Kirsten is absolutely right that we're at a point where we're in a much better place to understand each other. We have to keep doing that. And it's almost like every time we meet, we have to think about looking around the table and go, who's missing? Who's not here that should be here? And as long as we keep growing our circles and making sure that we're making our circles inviting to people, that's the real opportunity. That's the real magic in building community. And it's never going to be one big thing that changes anything in this world. It's going to be a million little things, and we're all part of the million little things. So whatever it is you're doing, keep doing it because it's working.
Those are great answers. If you'll allow me to ask you one more question, and then I'll move on to the great audience members. So I guess the other question I have is, what if like municipal politicians were in the room right now, because there is an election coming up in the fall, right? I think I'm trying to stay on top of Ottawa politics enough to know that, like, I know that the current mayor isn't running again, and so there is both the provincial election coming up and then changeover happening municipally. If they were in the room, what is one thing both or either of you would really want them to hear about Ottawa Indigenous community? Like, what is something that you really hope they really understand they need to honor in their next mandate?
For sure. I definitely I work alongside a lot of members of parliament already for different groups, and as I said time and time again, I think that really ensuring equality and equity for all communities within urban areas is the most important thing that the people within positions of power need to understand to help progress, because everyday citizens like us can continue to talk about inclusion, diversity, equality, but these things cannot become a reality unless it's being put in the forefront of people within power and within positions of power. And through different things, I've been able to help encourage members of parliament to take stances on ensuring more money goes towards housing, such as organizations like Gignal and the Inuit housing organizations here in Ottawa. So I think that ensuring equality, inclusion, and diversity really comes from understanding all the different communities within these systems and these cities, and ensuring that their voices are at the forefront of what they do, because how can you better serve a community by listening to them? It's as simple as that. You cannot know what your community wants to be done, and you can't speak for the entirety of the community, which is why it's so important to allow Indigenous youth groups and BIPOC youth groups and diversify the people that they're bringing in to help them make changes, and ensuring the guidance from these people is not going through one ear and out the other, but is really sticking with them and going to the decision-making tables.
That's a wonderful answer. Thank you.
From my perspective, I absolutely think that municipal politicians need to appreciate and understand the Indigenous perspective and an inclusion of opportunity, whether it's employment, whether it's development, investments like housing, like healthcare, like daycare. Certainly a big challenge in and around COVID is the whole implication of mental health. And I do believe that we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg in terms of the negative impacts of COVID, the isolation, the fear, and it's still not gone. The shock of perhaps having to go through another lockdown is right there. It's not gone away. And even if we were to take the notion of the recent truckers protest, right outside of our office, we're right around the corner from a big grocery store, and their loading bays are right across the street from the front of our office. And a lot of times big trucks will come, and before they can back up, they've got to get them to open the bay doors. So they'll just tap on their horns a couple of times. And I'm sure everybody that's in earshot of those horns blowing, they get re-traumatized by what we went through in February. And it makes you jump, and until you realize, oh, they're just trying to back up into the loading bays. But it's real for a lot of people, and it's important that that we appreciate that there's still trauma that's in the community, and mental health, I think, is a major issue, certainly in the Indigenous community going forward, for a whole host of reasons other than just the pandemic. There's racism and discrimination that's embedded, not only from and I know this is also difficult to acknowledge, but racism in our community is not just from non-Indigenous people. We're pretty brutal with each other, and we need to be honest and more forthright in addressing lateral violence within the community as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, the community's been through so much, and yeah, so thank you for also just bringing it back to those lived experiences that people have encountered recently and more long term. Just thank you both for sharing what you've been working on and bringing that to our department. And it's just, it's really exciting that we have you here, and we want to, use this time as wisely as possible because we know how busy you are. So I do have some questions that have come to me by direct message, and I'm just gonna, there's quite a few. So I'm just gonna sort of quickly, I'm gonna maybe start with the first one. So it's from Jaren. And their first question was for both speakers: what do you believe like a decolonial or decolonizing academia and knowledge production should look like? Is it possible for settlers to think and research in a decolonial way? And I guess you both sort of touched on that sort of like, researchers are getting involved in some of the Ottawa Aboriginal Coalition's work. And Kirsten, you brought us into conversations about some of the challenges you encountered as an Indigenous student. So I guess the open-ended question there is just, what should academics like myself and my colleagues, like what should our work look like to respect everything you've shared with us today?
For sure, Zoe, and thank you for that question. I think that moving forward, especially from this conversation, looks like being able to take something from this and not only teach yourself, but share this with your family, with your students, with people within your life. Because through education, not only comes self-education, but it comes community education, where the things that go into you can also go into others. Um, and it's so incredibly important that educators stop going to a book that could have been written so long ago to the point where you don't even know if it's an Indigenous author, if this person is safe, if it's reliable, verified. So realistically, it starts by throwing the book out the window and bringing the person through the door and having present human interaction with educators that not only speak about facts and history, but their lived experience. Because how better can you learn about racism, residential?
Oh, I think your audio cut out.
Connection here?
Oh, I think it's working again. Sorry.
Oh, geez. I'm so sorry, everybody. This doesn't usually happen. But yes, as I was saying, you know, it really comes from that lived perspective, because Indigenous peoples, we learn about our history and our culture from the day that we're born. But our lived experience infused with this history that we're being taught from our kokoms, our grandmothers, our grandfathers, our mushums, these are all things that make us so incredibly intertwined with education, because we are human living textbooks. We can come in and not only educate you about history and stuff that has affected us and other communities, but we also come in and we speak about that lived experience and how it personally affected us. And through that human interaction comes a better understanding than you will ever obtain from a book that could have been written by a non-Indigenous individual.
Awesome. Thank you. Mark?
I think the biggest challenge for the educational system is really, how do you balance the truth? And again, I think Kristen did an excellent job of, speaking to the notion that people that have lived experience are best positioned to speak to certain issues. And it really is incumbent on, and I commend Carlton for doing this type of outreach to speak with community people, because there's community resources that can help frame issues and discussions that allow people, if you're learning, to know that there is another perspective. And that I think is the notion, and that's the challenge of education, is to be more critical in how you examine any given issue, and be willing to question, whether it's a non-Indigenous person or myself, to how do you know that? Why do you say that? I think is all part of healthy discussion, healthy debate, and should be encouraged.
Awesome. There's another question that's come in. Mary has a question for you, Mark. She's wondering if you could speak a bit more to the distinction you mentioned between equality and social justice. Yeah, and just, you had mentioned that. I also wrote that down. I was really interested in, you sort of pointed out that you're trying to get the city to understand, not only from an equity perspective, but from also a social justice perspective, what they need to do. So anything you want to add to that would be amazing.
It's a conversation that's only now emerging, and the best way that I could describe the difference is that somehow the city appreciating our social justice position or reality is making it easier for them to understand where we're coming from, to challenge status quo or conventional thinking. That the pat answer from mainstream institutions is that Indigenous people, as long as we deal with them from an equity framework or an equity perspective, that'll make them happy. And that couldn't be further from the truth. What they don't understand is our reality or our circumstance. And it's really bringing them to our side of the table and have them look at the world with our eyes. Mm-hmm. and to hear our reality with our words, and see how our lives have been changed or touched by racism or by the opportunity of better employment or better education, and see what the life choices we're making that make a difference. Why is one person successful and another one? And I mean, even that gets down to a lot of times what I'm hearing more and more is this notion that more Indigenous people are becoming middle class. But middle class by their definition, not middle class or success by our definition. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's where we have to find common ground and common understanding. And that's an area that we're exploring with a lot more purpose. And right now the discussion is focused on the difference between an equity framework versus that social justice framework and perspective that we're trying. I confess we're still working on the nuance, and I think we'll be in a better position to describe that better in the coming months, because we're talking about it with a lot of purpose right now.
That's awesome. That's also something that I think Carleton could learn from, like the administration could really benefit from those ongoing community conversations, because social justice, it just sort of underpins all of those questions. So that's really exciting that this work is happening at the community level in Ottawa, and it will undoubtedly influence conversations elsewhere. So we are also indebted to you for carrying those conversations out. I'm just going to check here. There's a few more questions from Jaren. So I'll skip to another one here. Okay, so there's a good question here on the difficulties of seeing and hearing each other, but not understanding. Okay, so this is an interesting question. It's sort of around the question of, for both of you, what could institutions like Carleton, like the city, how could we invest in youth to help support some of those conversations that move us towards understanding, like both hearing and understanding? So I hope I'm translating Jaren's question in a way that's like useful. Jaren, any apologies to any mistranslation I've done to your question here, but it's a really interesting question here, sort of drawing on that distinction you made, Mark, between understanding and hearing. And I guess I'm just wondering, for both of you, both Kirsten and Mark, are there things that you think institutions in Ottawa could do to help facilitate that understanding, especially with that focus on youth, because such a large, part of our community is young people?
For sure. I think from a youth perspective, one way to really help the progression of student understanding and hearing individuals that come in and different people that are not like them would be to have open dialogue conversations. And these can be done through examples from like the Assembly of Seven Generations, who allows Indigenous and non-Indigenous individuals to attend their group circles, which in that possibility, that ultimately.
Oh, your audio is cut out again. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Usually happen.
It's okay. It's totally okay. We can hear you now, so that's good. Yeah, but we're talking about understanding and hearing, so it's almost like the Zoom is playing with us.
Never has happened to me before, especially in something like this. Don't know what's going on. But with that being said, it's really about open dialogue discussions so that the individuals can understand that despite the adversity and the different experiences we all face, there's so many similarities, not only between our cultures, but between each other as individuals within this world we call life.
Wonderful. Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Kirsten. You're persevering and we're very grateful. So perfect. Mark, was there anything else you wanted to add to that question?
Well, I don't think like a youth. And I think what's really, really important is that if Carleton as an institution is interested in better understanding Indigenous youth, they need to hear from Indigenous youth. And it would be very easy to approach Wabano or Ottawa, I believe Minwashan Lodge or Tungasuvia Inuit, or even Tuwagan Transition Home for Aboriginal women. All have youth groups or people that could be invited to a discussion to talk about what do Indigenous youth want, what do they expect, what do they need, and promote a conversation that allows them to express in their words with their voice exactly those issues. I think that would be remarkable.
Excellent. That's really exciting to sort of think about continuing to invest in and support these sort of youth-led initiatives. So I'm going to open it up now. If you're both comfortable, I'm going to open it up to live questions from the floor, so to speak. So if anyone has a question you want to ask directly rather than type it out, please raise your hand using the reaction in the lower toolbar down there, and I'll try to make sure I see you. And you can turn your mic on and ask your question to Mark and Kirsten directly. And we might open it for about 5 minutes, and then we might wrap it up so that we can finish and let you all go on your way this evening. But if anyone has a question you'd like to ask directly, please do go ahead. So I see Jaren's hand up. Was there anyone else? Jaren, you've had quite a few really good questions already, so I'm just going to open it and see if anyone else, but if no one else jumps in, then I'll let you go ahead. Okay, the floor is yours, Jaren. Go ahead.
Nice. Okay. I guess I'm super active. Can everyone hear me well? Okay. So I am just finishing my bachelor's degree from Carleton. And the question that I had, because I was studying in international relations, is do either of you see a possibility for the global community to support topics on decolonial education? Because I know that there's many parts of the world that were colonized by different European countries, and many of them are also working towards decolonial education, learning native languages. A lot of the work I think might actually be shared. And so I was wondering how people around different continents from different histories, but with the shared history of colonization, might support what we're working towards here?
For sure. I think that's a great question. As somebody who has spoken internationally, I've gotten the opportunity to speak to a number of different educators around the world. And I think that your question really does align with what they're already doing. I think that they are already trying to decolonize the way that their education systems are. And it's incredible the different things that have been happening around the world. A lot of self-education as well that young people have taken on in different parts of the world, such as India. I was on a panel with a young woman, and she is actually educating herself as a way to reclaim her education process so that it's not structured in a colonial atmosphere and in a colonial way. And I think that youth are so powerful and empowering. And I think that this is the next generation that's really going to start the further progression in regards to decolonizing not only the education system, but all different aspects of life. And it's so interesting because the very things that we work towards here in Canada, others are working towards within their own countries as well. And it really does show a sense of unity when different groups are able to go on panels and are able to go to different parts of the world together to learn from each other and to see the progression that's happening in different parts of the world and different parts of our Turtle Island. It's quite incredible. But to answer your question, yes, I definitely think that we can find unity in regards to decolonizing education.
What's interesting is that I think for the most part, there are a lot of connecting points between other Indigenous groups that have a kinship or a shared experience with colonization to begin with. And certainly they've come together through a number of forums that are sponsored through the United Nations. In our country, probably the bigger influence on the policy side is the challenges of implementing the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So there's certainly a framework that's in existence for any country to get behind, and many have already supported that. So I think there's a path to cooperation. But the world is very set in its ways, and it's the levers of power and influence. And I think it's going to be a constant, consistent struggle on the part of Indigenous people to decolonize just about anything. We can better frame our realities and our perspectives and hope people, I mean, then it becomes the argument that you've got to persuade other people to see how you see the world. And to be able to demonstrate that there is a better way or a more inclusive way. I think that's a challenge that we all face every day in everything that we do. But I think there are many opportunities to be more purposeful in how we breathe life in decolonization. And probably the first big hurdle to get over is a common understanding of what colonization is and what it means to you, what it means to me, and how it affects our lives. And if we make changes, what do those changes look like? But that's a big question.
Excellent. Thank you, Jaron, for
Thank you, Chimigwech.
Awesome. Thank you, Jaron. You've asked really good questions. And thank you both to Kirsten and Mark for answering. I'm just going to open it up one more time and see if there's any other questions from the floor. And also, we can also, if there's anything you want to ask, you can also pass it along to the department. I'm sure that we can reach out to Mark and Kirsten afterwards. So Najib, you have a question for us.
Yes, hello everyone. I apologize if I mumble a little bit. I'm very insecure on the topic and insecure with the knowledge I have on the topic. I'm a first generation immigrant. I've been here for less than 20 years. Just like Mrs. Dumont, I was destined to be a failure academically. I fought this, and I was also a youth in conflict with the law. I chose to share this with you guys today because I have two questions, and it is easy to interpret them as negative, but it's full of positivity coming from my end. So I come from a country that was colonized by the French for 200 years. We got our independence in 1962. My parents were considered indigenous in that land. And we got our independence through war, violence. My question is, there are individuals in Canada presently who are not white, forgive me the expression, or Aboriginal, who take the subject of Canadian history and colonialism to heart. And I know there are many individuals like myself who would love to contribute to a positive change in Canada. But unfortunately, we have not found the proper channels. How can an individual like myself, a new immigrant that doesn't have connections with people who are set up for generations in Canada, or individuals like myself who do not trust presently established institutions or organizations, how can we go on our own with our own money, with our own will and energy, contribute to the history of Canadian colonialism and the struggles that Aboriginals go through? That's one question that I have.
First of all, great question, and thank you for sharing this within the group. I think that that's very courageous and powerful of you to share with not only the speakers, but with everyone else present. From a youth standpoint, and I think that within today's age, having access to so many different platforms, it makes it so much easier for self-education and to get connected and to understand different Indigenous issues. It's incredible the things that you can learn even just from following simply someone on social media or going down a Twitter feed. And that's really what I suggest to people who are of the younger generation, because I know how hard it can be to want to Google this research, but not be able to verify who created it, where it's coming from, and if it's confirmed and liable and accurate source of information, and where this information is coming from, if it's an Indigenous individual, if it's someone of non-Indigenous descent, which is why within today's age of social media, it makes it so much easier to be able to learn from real Indigenous individuals. But then again, there are always that risk within there in regards to possibly, learning from somebody who isn't confirmed by their community as being a part of that and being a safe individual and someone with accurate knowledge. So just like the risk factors within institutions, there are risk factors in many different ways that we can access education and information. But as somebody who wants to help the progression of Indigenous success, I would definitely suggest going to a protest or going to a movement, going to an event. Algonquin College had an Indigenous comedy show. Their stuff such as this that's Carleton's putting on is a great platform to learn from educators and learn from cultural knowledge keepers. So I think that you even being here today is the start on your journey to help the progression of Canada and to help the progression of your family and your future. So Chimigwech for being here and taking that next step.
Thank you so much.
I would say from my perspective is continue to be curious. And I think, again, Kirsten talked about connecting by attending events. That's, or reach out to even the Friendship Center are always looking for volunteers, but the opportunity to volunteer would certainly be encouraged, and to learn more about the community itself might help you figure out where you can best contribute or where your best interests would lie. The other opportunity, mind you, I don't think we have one planned yet, but probably the quickest, easy introduction to the greater Indigenous community of Ottawa would be to attend an Ottawa Aboriginal community forum. Like I said, we used to hold them twice a year, usually one in the winter and one late spring or early fall at City Hall. And we had 250 people attend. And it was an update on what we were doing and an opportunity to meet and see other people from the city, other community organizations, as well as Indigenous organizations. So if there's a way that you can connect either with me or with the Ottawa Aboriginal Coalition and look on our website, we post everything there, and you'll be able to see the organizations that are part of the coalition, but also any community announcements, as well as any community forum that we might be undertaking, and they're open to anybody that wants to attend.
Thank you.
Thank you, Najib. That was such an important question. And both Kirsten and Mark, thank you so much for your suggestions on ways that community members can become involved. And Najib, a question like yours came up. I was part of a federal discussion this week, a workshop on integrating Indigenous knowledge and co-creating community research projects. And a number of the audience members, like we really unpacked sort of the idea of what reconciliation looks like when not everyone living in Canada has participated in or benefited from the colonization that French and British colonialism, enacted. And we had a really great conversation kind of unpacking that and thinking through, like, what does it mean to sort of speak across those shared but also different struggles between Indigenous and other marginalized and oppressed communities throughout the globe. And so I know that it doesn't immediately answer your question, but I do think that this is one of the most important questions that we are tasked with within the country is, reconciliation, but also, kind of just explicitly recognizing that many of our friends and neighbors and community members have experienced their own communities' displacement and dispossession. And so that strength across sort of, acknowledging one another's experiences and just really building community from that, I think is just so important. And I know that that's work that our own department is committed to, is sort of recognizing these shared and different struggles. So just thank you I think that's such a perfect question and answer from both Kirsten and Mark to end on, just that idea of building solidarity and making Ottawa a place that is supportive for diverse and powerful communities. So I think it is 5:29 BC time. So I imagine it's 8:39 your time. So if it's okay, I think we might wrap up. But just again, thank you to both our speakers for sharing your knowledge and experiences. Thank you to the really thoughtful and engaging questions from the audience. You've just been a really great group tonight. And so Ginaskomitin, that's how we say it on the prairies in Nihiawayan. Thank you. Hi. Just gratitude to the department for hosting this, and to Kirsten and Mark for your time, and to all of you in the audience for your engaged presence. And I hope that you have a really great rest of your evening. So thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Have a good day.
Many thanks. It's